It was the handshake seen round the world between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un ahead of their historic first-ever meeting in Singapore. And afterward, the two leaders seemed to set aside the past year and a half of insults and animosity for new talk of cooperation.
As history has proven over and over again, adversaries can indeed become friends.
Indeed, Trump and Kim ultimately signed a pledge committing the U.S. and North Korea to peace, security, and the full denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, although details on just when and how that's going to happen were a little unclear.
It does take a long time to, pull off complete denuclearization. The sanctions will come off when we are sure that the nukes are no longer a factor.
Trump said human rights abuses were one of the primary topics of the talks, but perhaps the biggest concession from either side came when Trump pledged to halt joint military exercises with South Korea.
We will be stopping the war games, which will save us a tremendous amount of money, unless and until we see that the future negotiation is not going along like it should.
Trump also said that eventually he wants to pull the U.S. military off the peninsula entirely, prompting concerns from many that he might be giving up too much too soon and putting too much faith in a regime that has reneged on past promises to shut down its nuclear program. So what makes this time different, if anything does? I'm joined now by Saivetz, senior advisor at MIT's Security Studies program, and a man you may recognize from yesterday, Jim Walsh, a senior research associate at MIT's Security Studies program, who's been involved in past nuclear discussions in Iran and North Korea. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Good to be back.
I want to start with you. Yesterday, before the summit took place, you said that for people like you and Carol, this is the equivalent of the royal wedding.
Yes.
Can you stick with that analogy a little more and tell me how the wedding we just witnessed went?
Well, I think we had a big procession, but I don't feel like the marriage was consummated. I was hoping you weren't going to go there, by the way.
This is a family program, by the way.
I thought, no way, I
should at 7 p.m.
Yeah, continue this metaphor.
Okay, long procession, marriage not consummated.
Yeah, so you feel like, okay, that's good, but it leaves you a little unsatisfied, I think.
Thank you for gamely playing along
with
that.
Okay, it was all too vague. I mean, if you read the statement, and even if you read Trump's comments from the press conference, it's, oh, yeah, he trusts him, he's great, he's done a great job in North Korea, he assumed the job when he was in his 20s, and everything else. And it just seems to me that Trump is giving away a lot, maybe paying a dowry, before you even had the wedding. All right, got to finish it.
If you could both be as specific as possible, what has the U.S. agreed to give up? And what, if anything, concrete have we received in return? We talked about the war games, as the president put it. Past presidents will probably not have used that phrase. Apparently, they're going to be canceled. What else have we given up, and what, if anything, have we gotten in return?
Well, I think there's a pretty good list here. From a policy standpoint, I think what we have here is freeze for freeze. No one's calling it that, but that was a proposal that the North Koreans launched while Obama was still in office and also floated by the Chinese. Essentially, they have a freeze on their long-range missile tests and nuclear tests, which they've had for a while in preparation for this. So we've been getting the relief of that, no tests during this period, and they get relief from these exercises. Both are reversible, right? We can gin up the military exercises, back up again if we want to, and they can start testing again. We got some detainees back. That's positive. And then they were quite vague about the peace treaty. I thought I would hear more on that. So the other thing was the remains, and family exchanges.
I think what worries me is that merely by meeting with him and treating him as royalty, if you will, we've given North Korea something that the grandfather, the father, and now the grandson have always wanted, which is legitimacy on the international stage. They've been treated like a co-equal with the president of the United States.
There, one right next to me.
I want to push back on this consensus view. That and $3 will get you a cup of coffee. All they have is the pictures. You could argue that he is now more constrained. After showing those pictures in the DPRK of them shaking hands and being buddy-buddy, can he then blame the U.S. when he says we need to, squeeze more out of you in 6 months?
Okay, so Carol, you get to push back to the pushback?
Okay. There may be some truth in that, Jim, but I really feel that the legitimacy issue, look, I deal with Russia, and the big thing for Putin was to be seen as sort of the grand master on the world stage. I think Kim has now pulled off exactly the same kind of thing, and the idea that we are going to cancel the maneuvers, the joint military exercise, without telling the South Koreans.
I'm glad you brought that up, because they apparently were caught by surprise about our decision
Yes.
to cancel,
Right.
although they also seem to have responded very positively,
Yeah,
right?
Moon is totally cool with this.
President
Now,
of South Korea.
yes,
Right.
process-wise, sounds like a disaster. But, you know, in terms of policy outcome, they're totally cool with that. I think Moon is actually not averse at some point in the future to having U.S. troops leave, but that's a very divided issue in South Korea.
What also worries me is that the Chinese are winning here.
How so?
Because if we cancel the exercises, if we eventually pull our troops out, that's something that the Chinese have wanted for years and years and years. If we eliminate our presence in their neck of the woods, then they have gotten a lot to gain. And the Russians are being cautious, but they're also saying this is a really good thing.
I can already tell this far in the segment. I mean, we could have a conversation, I think, about this for an hour. I would enjoy it. I don't know if viewers would. I had wanted
What are
to
you
spend a
saying
little more
exactly?
time on the potential propaganda victory for Kim here.
Yeah.
The president told George Stephanopoulos and Greta Van Susteren, used phrases like great personality, funny guy, very smart guy, great negotiator. He trusts me and I trust him. But I want to turn now to human rights, and we don't really know. The president says he talked about the new primary topic. We don't know what he actually had to say. First, I want to read from this UN Human Rights Commission report from, I believe, 2014, just to get their characterization of Kim's regime. The UNHCR found that Kim has committed crimes against humanity, against his own people. These crimes entail extermination, murder, enslavement, torture, imprisonment, rape, forced abortion, and other sexual violence, the forcible transfer of populations, the enforced disappearance of persons, and the inhumane act of knowingly causing prolonged starvation. Now I want to contrast that with what the president had to say about how Kim feels about his people and Kim's people feel about him. Let's take a look.
His country does love him, his people. You see the fervor, they have a great fervor. He loves his people, not that I'm surprised by that, but he loves his people.
Does the president not know what Kim has basically agreed the world over to have done, or does he not care, or is this some sort of masterful negotiating tactic?
Could be some combination of all three, to be very honest with you. He may not know, he may not care, and it's also, you know, I think Trump thinks that flattery will get him far. He loves to be flattered, so he's mirror imaging here, which may or may not be such a good thing to do. But I know that the human rights community here is aghast that Trump had flattered him to such an extent when there's such terrible things still going on in North Korea.
Let me say this. This is a tough issue. So, of course, no one wants to see gulags or a police state. And so the policy question is, well, how do you get to a different place? And then that's divided in two. There's accountability for what you've done in the past, right? People have to be held accountable for their crimes that they've committed. But going forward, how do you minimize more people being victims? And that's a policy question. And my guess is the president, and I think I might agree with him on this, you're more likely to get a North Korean regime that is less of an abuser of its own people if it begins to open up and feels less threatened.
Well, you also have to remember that Henry Kissinger seems to be one of the people to whom Donald Trump goes to speak and everything. And Kissinger used to argue about the Soviet Union that the human rights issues, the Jewish immigration issue, whatever, should be negotiated behind the scenes and should not be part of the public discourse at all. And I think if we want to give Trump credit, I think he's taking a cue right from Kissinger.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I know people will be surprised by this. You can call North Koreans all sorts of names, and it's like water off a duck's back. They don't really care. But they seem super sensitive about the human rights stuff. Like they've marched out of the UN. They've done all this stuff. For whatever reasons, this is, publicly, this is a sensitive one for them.
I'm glad that you made the points that you did, because it makes me a little less concerned about what seems like another example of the president's affinity for authoritarian leaders. I'm thinking of Duterte and Putin.
Yes, there's a track record there.
Yes.
All right. The president talked at one point, I think in the aftermath of the summit, in glowing terms about North Korean real estate. Let's take a look at what he had to say about the potential he sees there.
They have great beaches. You see that whenever they're exploding their cannons into the ocean, right? I said, boy, look at that. Wouldn't that make a great condo behind? And I explained, I said, you know, instead of doing that, you could have the best hotels in the world right there. Think of it from a real estate perspective.
All right, what are the odds that we see a Trump-branded property springing up in Pyongyang or on the coast sometime in the next decade? I'm serious. It sounds like a wise-ass question, but it's not.
I think it's possible. I think if this goes according to Trump's script, whatever it is, that he would love to do that. It's all been about real estate. Russia's about real estate. This is about real estate, too. I'm not surprised in the least.
It's higher than the odds I would have given you if 10 years ago you had asked me, are Trump and Kim going to have a summit?
Right.
Fair enough. Closing question, what would you two, as people who paid attention to this for a long time, what would you like to see happen now so that whatever we just saw in Singapore yields good results for the U.S. and the world?
I think that we need to see some kind of a roadmap. I hate that word, but a roadmap that that talks about the steps that will be taken. Nobody's mentioned the word verification about any of the things that Kim may or may not have promised to Donald Trump. And I think that we really need some proof and some way of moving forward.
All right, Jim, you get the last word, and you got about 10 seconds for it.
Some act that shows the political commitment of Chairman Kim, that he sends a signal that the rest of the bureaucracy is going to get in line with, that we're serious about this, whatever form that takes.
All right, Jim Walsh, Carol Saivetz, thank you both.
Thank you.